Hello, everybody. It's Heath Robinson back again with world traveler and photographic professional Joel Wolfson. Joel, are you there?
I am here. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. Just glad you could join us again. It's been a while. I think since what, February? Something like
It's
that.
been at least a couple months, but I'm sure glad to be back.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you back.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. I always love doing these webinars for Topaz, and thanks to Topaz for hosting. Today, our theme is keeping it natural. So, what does that really mean, and why is it important? Well, when we see something beautiful and capture it with our camera, we want to convey that to the viewer. At least that's the goal for most of us. Because a camera can't interpret what it sees the way our brains do, of course, we have to compensate and adjust our images so we can convey the feel of being there. And perhaps in the case of a portrait, we might want to communicate an emotion or something about the essence of that person or animal. But what I see a lot, particularly with nature shots, but just kind of in general, is photographers getting carried away with saturation, sharpness, and other controls. And then the image ends up being jarring rather than conveying the feel of being there. And I can tell you after doing selling artwork for 30 years that the most enduring artwork are the ones that have a natural feel to them. Granted, I could probably sell a piece of artwork that has those electric colors and over sharpened and makes people's eyes pop initially, but I want someone to be enjoying that piece of artwork 10 years from now as much as the day they put it up. And so what I'm going to do is show you how some of my everyday adjustments and plugins make it easy to keep it natural. I'll start with an easy image and we'll kind of work our way into some other images requiring more techniques. And just sort of keep in mind that the goal is to have an impactful image, but to keep it natural looking. Before we jump into it, just want to mention, Heath mentioned some of it, but I have a number of educational resources through my blog, my newsletter, articles. I archive these webinars, workshops, etc. Many of these are free, and if you want to make use of it, the best way is to sign up for my newsletter. I only send out one or two a month at the most. This is just a screenshot of my website. This happens to be my for photographers section and the learning page. I've got a bunch of stuff for photographers in addition to this workshop link. But the important thing is over here on the left. All I need is your email address, first name, pick whether you want Fine Art News or the Photo News. You can always unsubscribe at any time from any newsletter, but that's really kind of the best way to keep up with what I'm doing. Before we get into the photos, I have a little surprise for you that I didn't know I was going to have until just a few hours ago. And that is I'm going to give you a sneak preview of a new product from Topaz, and it's called AI Gigapixel. And what it does is it enlarges images. Now, there have been a lot of products like that out there for years, and the best ones use what's called fractal technology, but I've never seen anything that does as good a job as this. And please do keep in mind, I've literally only had my hands on this for a few hours, and it's a pre-release version, so it's not finished yet. But it's really cool because you can take an image, even a small one like a thumbnail or a video grab or something like that, and enlarge it quite a bit. And I played around with a few images today, and so far I've been really impressed. So this is the startup screen, and it uses, what's different about it is it uses artificial intelligence. So what I was told by Heath is that every pixel is compared with 2 million images to come up with the interpretation. And it is batch processing, so you don't have to worry about it tying up your machine. You can just, set up a bunch of images and run them while you're sleeping or whatever. So you can go into your Finder here and you can just, grab whatever images you want. Let's see what I have here. Well, I'll just randomly pick a couple just to show you what it looks like in the interface. So it loads your images on the left here, and then you can select your parameters over here on the right. You can do it by size, so you can plug in the number of pixels. You can do it by scale. And what I was trying today was going from 200 all the way up to 600% just to see what it would do. And then you pick your output format. So if you have TIFF, you can pick your bit depth and color profile and all that. If it's JPEG, your quality. It's all pretty straightforward. I'm not going to make you watch the progress bar or anything like that, but what I'll do is just real quick show you some that I just did literally like an hour ago. So here, I'll open these three just to show you. So this first one right here, it's a 1080 pixels, so it's like a screen grab, or it's like a still frame from a video. That's the resolution, so it's pretty low resolution. This is looking at it at 100%. Let me just fill out the screen here. So if I bring this up to what am I at here? Let me look at my all right, so I'm at 400%, and let's go up to, so if I go up to 600%, which is what you can do with this thing. All right, this is what this low res image looks like, just enlarging it to 600% just to view it in Photoshop. It's all pixelated. You don't see any detail. But what I'll do is load, I'll tile these up. So here's the one that's 400%, and let's look at that in full resolution. So there it is, and I'll compare them. So if you're looking at there, look at the difference. So look down here is using AI Gigapixel to enlarge that to 400%, and look at all the detail you get. You can see your eyelashes, all the hair, the bark and the tree, and then this one in the middle is the one that I did up to 600%. Whoops, with this program. So, and look at that, it's still, it's pretty amazing. I mean, if you look at the image above it, that's the image it was taken from. And then it just enlarged it and refined it. And you can still get, to me, that's just incredible detail if you look at the bark and the eyes and everything else from essentially a video frame. So anyway, that's a super quick overview. It's called AI Gigapixel. It's supposed to be available this Thursday. Heath is going to put up coupon codes at the end of the webinar that'll be good on anything, including this new one. So just keep it in mind, keep an eye on that if you have a need for enlarging things. It's not just good for stuff that's low resolution like this. You can take higher resolution ones. I was playing with that and enlarging them up to like what would be, you know, 5 or 6 foot prints from a very modest size file. All right, well, let's talk about some tools in Topaz Studio and keeping things natural. So the first image I want to do is, I said I'd start with a simple one. So let's see. All right, so what we're going to do is this is our goal. So this is a simple portrait of a cow elk. For those not familiar with the cow part of that name, that just means a female elk, and the males are called bulls. I like the strand of 2 strands of grass here sticking out of her mouth, and she heard me and popped her head up, and she's kind of giving me this wary look, but it's a pretty simple image. My studio happens to be on a wildlife corridor, so they come through from time to time, and if I'm up early enough in the morning, I can get some photos. So I want to show you how I got to the final on this. This is where I started, and then another version I did, and I should have time to show you that real quick because it's a pretty simple one. This is the black and white, and so this one and the black and white are the end game here, and this is the image that I started with. Now you can see it's got that lackluster raw is blah look because this is taken from a raw file. It is a crop, so this is only, oh, maybe a third or a fourth of the frame. So we've got a lot of challenges here, but we'll make it look good. Now, one of the first things I do, and this is sort of a new first step for me, or recent, because it's AI clear, And with the advent of AI Clear, that is now often my first step in processing an image. And what AI Clear does, let me blow this up a little bit for you. AI Clear is sort of made for noise reduction, but it's using artificial intelligence, so it does it intelligently, and it does it without sacrificing details. So Topaz makes an excellent product called Denoise. I've had that for years and I love it. It does take a little time to really get to know the controls. It does have some pretty good presets, but this thing with the artificial intelligence, even if I don't have noise in the image, I'll use it just to kind of give it an initial first step for capture sharpening. Sometimes I'll add some more after that, but this is the default. It defaults to low, so you have the model strength, which is the amount of essentially noise suppression that you're doing, and the recover detail slider is if it suppresses it too much. Let's say you just want to bring some of those details back, you can do that. And as a little added bonus, you can adjust exposure and clarity from within it. But a lot of times I'll just use it at the default. In this case, to me, the background, well, the noise doesn't bother me too much, but if you want to get rid of that noise, you can go to medium or high. So I'll click on the medium, and this blue progress bar goes. And now you can see it took out the majority of the noise. There's still a little bit right up in here. Hopefully you guys can see that on your end over the internet, and there's a little more in here. So if I wanted to completely get rid of that noise, I can try the high. And I can tell you right now, it's probably going to be too much. So now, in my opinion, it's blurred the background too much. But look how cool that is. It didn't touch the what I would call the high frequency data, the data with all the detail. It knows how to distinguish that. So it's a really cool way to do it, what might take 2 or 3 steps, because normally if I were going to deal with an image like this, I'd do the noise suppression, then I'd create a mask for the elk, and then I would do the sharpening on the inside of the non-masked out part of that. So what I can do in this case, since high is too high and medium is a little too low, is we just use this opacity slider, which is on every adjustment in Topaz Studio. So I'll bring it down to about 50%. I'm seeing a little bit of noise in there, which doesn't really bother me. It's so subtle you can hardly see it, especially if I go to 100% here. And it's what I didn't like about the high all the way up was it didn't give me enough definition so that I could recognize this as trees and tree branches and pine needles and whatnot, because it does give us a sense of environment. Now, the next thing I want to do is sort of a next step in capture sharpening. By the way, those of you that are new to Studio, I usually do a quick little interface overview. So what I'm doing on the right here, this is where all the adjustments are and all your tools. Over on the left are presets. They're actually called effects. So effects are combinations. You can have any number of adjustments, save it off as a preset. There are also hundreds of these that come with the program. And this little public button up here, if you select it, gives you even more. If you want to view more of them at once, you can click on small. So if I were to click on any of these, like let's say bright night, it just pops in all the presets dealing with that. I don't really like the look of that, so we'll undo that and go back to where we were on our first step. And then along the bottom are all the images you have open in a film strip. These tools up on top here are for viewing. And then there's a few tools down here which I'll be showing at least the cropping on that in a subsequent image. So let's go finish up our capture sharpening. If you're wondering what capture sharpening is, every single camera loses a little bit of acutance or sharpness when you shoot the image. And if most cameras have what's called an anti-aliasing filter over the sensor, which purposefully blurs the image a little bit in an attempt to get rid of artifacts. Thankfully, a lot of manufacturers are moving towards getting rid of those. The cameras I use don't have them, but even so, I still need to do some capture sharpening. I mean, if you look at this, it looks pretty sharp. I just want to add a little bit more. And so I use precision detail, which is an excellent way to add detail to an image. You'll notice when I bring it up, there's actually six categories, but three main categories: small, medium, and large detail, and they're just what you would think. And within each one of those, you have two adjustments for sort of a little fine tuning and a little broader tuning of that particular segment of the detail. And then on the bottom, you have some other controls for lighting. But in this case here, I'll just blow it up a little bit. And when I'm doing capture sharpening, which means trying to bring back what was lost in the translation from the camera, especially if you're using JPEGs, your camera can be processing those JPEGs. So if you have sharpening applied in your camera, then you may not need to do this step. But I'm assuming here that you're working with raw images, because that's how we get our best quality, and that's generally what I do. I only use JPEGs if I need to go really fast from the camera out to social media or whatever it is. So I'll take this small detail slider and I'll move that up. Now, prior to AI Clear, I might have been up in the 30s or maybe as high as 40, but you can see it's looking a little crunchy there. So because I've already applied AI Clear, I can use a little bit milder detail enhancement. So for me, that's good. It didn't introduce much in the way of noise back here, and we're already looking at over 100% enlargement anyway. Remember, this is just a piece of a full frame. And so that's really all I need to do for that one. And I'm going to close that up. Now, you can, I'll just show you if I bring up the medium, that's what that does. You can always move these sliders to an extreme to see what they'll do. I'll move the large detail, and you can see how it does differentiate the type of detail. That's starting to give it more of like a kind of a funky, grungy HDR look. But right here, all I'm trying to do is just bring back a little detail. Now, clearly, this image is a little bit overexposed, or actually it's just kind of washed out looking. That's usually sort of the look you get from RAW. So I'm going to do my basic adjustments, which I can choose on the menu here. Topaz also has, the ones you might use more often up in little buttons here. So there's my basic adjustment. And what I'm going to do for that is just the usual things. For one thing, I'll probably bring the exposure down just a little bit, because it does seem just a hair overexposed to me. And then I want to set my black point and my white point. And you can do that either with the dropper and put it on an area that's supposed to be black and an area that's supposed to be white. In this case, I have enough of a histogram here that I'll magnify. You can see the data. We want to take this point, move it to the left, and then over here on the right, this point, which is the end of the data, and move that to the right by using the black point and white point. So I'll take the black level, bring those blacks down, and I'll take the white level and slide those over right so that we're just on the edge of that. So that's looking pretty good there. Now the next thing, I'm almost done here. It's looking pretty darn good already, but I generally like to add a sense of depth. We're dealing with a two-dimensional medium here, and so if you want a sense of 3 dimensions, you need to add some depth. And the best way to do that, this is like one of my all-time favorite adjustments, is precision contrast, and I use it on virtually every single image just to add a sense of depth, if nothing else. And kind of like the detail adjustment, it's divided into different types of contrast. So micro being very, very little, if any, difference from one area to another in contrast, all the way up to high contrast. And you can just kind of build it as you go along. So again, if you're not sure what it's going to do, just move that slider to an extreme, and you can see that's affecting just the areas that don't have much contrast between them and accentuating it. So I'll probably just put a little bit of that on, 20-ish, same, and with the low, I'm going to do mostly low and medium here. So again, if I'll move that all the way up, just broad, so you can see it, not all the way up, but just so you can get an idea what it's doing. and that one around 30. I'll probably do the medium somewhere around the same in the 30-ish range there. Now, when I get to the high contrast, I often will go to the negative, because what happens is as you build the contrast, it starts to push your histogram, push your white values higher and your black values lower. What's neat about this is you can make this a negative number, and if you watch the histogram, it takes it off the edges there. And it doesn't sacrifice that mid-tone or these other levels of contrast, and we still get that sense of depth. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go up to the eyeball, and this turns off on and off the layer, so I'll toggle that off. And now you should see it without the depth, and it's somewhat subtle. And again, this whole thing of keeping it natural is all about subtlety. We're not going for extremes here. And I'll turn that back on, and you really get a nice sense of a third dimension there. The only other final tweak I might do here, actually I'll show you something real quick, is every single layer in Topaz Studio has this little plus sign, which as soon as you click on it, it shows your mask and a masking tool. So you can mask every single adjustment individually, which is so cool. And in this case, what I want to do is with that contrast, I got a little more contrast in the background than I really want. So I'm just going to select the brush, and let me turn off my little cursor thing here so you can see the brush. So if you go to the radius, look in the center of the image, and you can see me changing the size of the brush here. So I want a fairly broad brush, and this is just really basic stuff. I'm going to click on the black. So white reveals and black conceals, and all I'm going to do is brush in some of this area that I think got a little too contrasty from my contrast adjustment, and that actually helps our sense of depth, because we don't want to try to make the blurry background look like it has depth. We want to differentiate that from our main subject here. This could be a person too, or it could be a building, whatever it is, with this blurred background. So that masking thing, really quick, really handy. There's tons of controls there, and we'll go through some more of those as I move along here. My only final step is another one of my favorite adjustments called HSL tuning, which I use on quite a few images. So this allows you to selectively adjust hue, saturation, and lightness for individual colors in an image. So it's pretty powerful. And in this case, this final little tweak is just to show some of the variation and color in her fur. So you can see there's sort of a little bit reddish and orangish in there. And if you want to see where those colors are, you just, here, let me go back to my cursor highlight so you can see my cursor. So as you hover over these colors, it shows you where they are in the image. So not much yellow, it's mostly the red and the orange like I thought for her fur. So I'm just going to click on the red. Now I can control the red saturation, bring that up a bit. If I bring it up a lot, again, you can see exactly where the reds are, so there aren't a lot of them in there, but I'll bring those up a little bit in saturation, bring the lightness down. That kind of helps accentuate it somewhat too. And it's pretty subtle in this case. The orange will have a little more effect here, so I'll bring that up. And now you can see that nice differentiation in the color of her fur without it. I'm going to back this off a little, without it looking too crazy. Now it also brought up, this is really nitpicky, but if you wanted these, the dead pine needles in the background were a little orangey, so we could do the same thing with the mask if we want, and just really quickly brush that out so that we're not bothered too much by that color. Now she's really standing out. And so let's take a look at where we came on this thing. So other than doing the black and white version, this is kind of my final here. Whoops, I'm going to do this before and after. Okay, so this over on the left is where we started. I'm going to get rid of that because it's a little distracting with all those. Here we started with that kind of blasé. Let me go to the fit. So whoops, so you can see the whole image. All right, and there we are. It's a pretty dramatic difference. Now, what I'm going to do is I'll go back to the full one and just show you really fast And this is how we're going to get to the black and white. Let me take the image here. So I'm just going to use the black and white adjustment that's in here. There is black and white effects too, and if I have time, I'm going to show you that because that has a lot more robust controls on it, and it's pretty cool. So my default is pretty darn nice to begin with. All I'm going to do is differentiate that fur again, and I already know that it's mostly orange. And if I bring that way up, you can see it lightens that. I don't want to bring it up quite that much, maybe just 15, 20, somewhere in there, just to kind of give it that final touch. And again, we can just do the before and after here. So there's between the original and the black and white. And if I shut off our black and white layer, there's again the before and after with the color. All right, so I mentioned, you know, a lot of tools here, and so here's, before I go on to the next image, I'll just show you real quick. I created a slide here. People are always asking me which ones to buy. Now there's several good ones that come with it. I'm not putting those in this list. These cost money, so I tried to distill it down to just real essential ones that I think people will use all the time. So, and I just used these three in this image, and I'll probably use them in all of the images. So AI Clear, Precision Detail, and Precision Contrast. And then I have another slide here, which I would classify frequently used. So they're bread and butter ones for me. I've got 4 of them. Adjust, which I'll be showing. HSL color tuning, I already showed you. I'm gonna try to do black and white effects, time permitting. And remask, which I'm not gonna be showing today, but it is the best masking tool out there. So let's go back to Studio, and let me go on to the next image here. So this next one right here, this is an old shot I did at Volcanoes National Park on the Big Island in Hawaii. There's a huge tonal range here from the black lava to the sunlight in the sky. You're not going to believe what my original capture looks like, and the fact that I ended up with this, but here it is. I know it looks like black nothingness almost. I originally did 3 exposures with the intention of doing HDR, but I wanted to see what I could do with just this one exposure. And if I shot this a long time ago, but if I were shooting this today knowing that I wasn't going to use HDR, and in a lot of cases, people use HDR when they don't really need it. That is if you're just trying to expand your tonal range. Now there's other specialized purposes for HDR, but I would probably expose it the same way. And it may look underexposed, but what you have to keep in mind is that the LCD on the back of your camera, or looking at it on your monitor right now, doesn't reveal all the information that's captured by your camera. You know, any modern digital camera, most of them anyway, capture just a humongous dynamic range. Pardon my delays for drinking water here. I've got some allergies going, and I'm trying to keep my voice clear if I can. So this is one where I'm going to show you how I got from here to this image here. And one of my main tools, and this is one of my all-time favorite packages from Topaz, and it's called Adjust. Now, those of you that came from the plugin side of Topaz understand this. And those of you that have just been using it since Studio, Topaz makes a whole bunch of plugins. And if you go up to the menus here in Studio, there's one that says plugins right there in the upper left here. And if I click on that, those are all the plugins that I own. So whatever you have will show up there, and I'm going to use Adjust. Adjust I call the Magic Exposure Balancer. Yeah, that looks great, doesn't it? What happens is it defaults to whatever you were doing before. So I always, in these plugins, I always go down to the lower right here, click on Reset, and that gives us our starting point. Now, the interface is very similar to Studio in that we have presets on the left and collections of presets above that. Over on the right are all of our tools, and there are a lot of tools in here. And again, up on top is stuff for viewing. And you can save off presets and that sort of thing. So I have it set on my collection right now, which is showing all the presets there. I could, I'll just pick one randomly here. This is one city night equalize. Actually, that looks pretty pretty darn good for a starting point, but I'm going to show you how to get to a place like that. And it sometimes this thing does just kind of seem like magic. So I'll reset it. And basically, over on the left here are all your panels. This is, sorry, on the right. The adaptive exposure, underneath that panel, you have adaptive exposure slider and a region slider. And these two are really the magic of the program, and they're the key aspect of it. And I don't know anybody else out there that has anything like this. It's pretty cool. So what adaptive exposure does is it allows you to adjust exposure without losing the extremes. So as you know, like if we use a standard brightness or exposure slider, like this one down here, for instance, and if we move the slider up, we bring out detail in the lava and we sacrifice all our highlights. Likewise, you know, you guys have all done this. You move it down to the bottom, and you can see there's tons of detail and color in that sunset sky, but everything else goes black and we've blocked up all our shadows. So clearly we can't use a conventional one. And that's what adaptive exposure tries to do it adaptively. And I'll explain in just a second what regions is for. I'm going to set it on 1 for right now. So when regions is on 1, it's treating this image essentially as one piece or one entity, and it's going to apply adaptive exposure to the image as a whole. And as I bring this up, I'm changing the exposure, bringing the exposure up, but I'm not losing my highlight detail and I'm not really losing my shadow detail. And I'm going to bring this up pretty high, like maybe 50-ish here. And it still looks pretty good, and it's really done an amazing job, but the regions really help that out, because what it does is it divides it into sections, kind of like graph paper. It applies adaptive exposure to each individual section and then puts it all together. So when you have these pockets of differing exposure all over an image, like this scene where you have extremes, or a night scene like a night skyline or something like that, then you're going to be using higher values here, and it really helps. So I'm going to move this up, and you can watch it. The biggest difference you see is in the sky. So I think this is an excellent starting point. Believe it or not, they have similar technology for the color. So if I go down to the color panel, you can see it says adaptive saturation. Now this, I'll tell you, will be more subtle than what you just saw with the adaptive exposure, but I'll bring that up, and then I'll bring my regions up to somewhere around the same as the other one. And you can see now I've got a lot of my color back, and it's getting a lot closer to the way I actually saw the scene. Remember, you know, raw is blah, not to mention I did my exposure. I guess I never really explained why I would want an exposure like this, but the reason is that digital cameras are linear, so once you reach a certain point of information in the highlights, it just cuts it off and there's no more information there, period. It's not like film where it's a gradual curve, for those of you that remember film like me. So the reason, so essentially you're exposing for the highlights, because I know I can bring the detail back in the shadows. If any of you, well, I don't think I want to get into the exposed to the right discussion now, but there's a technique of using your histogram to expose to the right. But anyway, this is maximizing the highlight detail, and then I bring up the shadows later. So this is why I'm able to do this with this kind of exposure. The magic of adaptive exposure and adjust, and starting with a decent exposure to begin with. So this is going to be now my starting point. I'll click OK, and I guess we were in the slides last. So you notice it slid over to the right here. It creates a new file, so that's now my starting point from what came out of adjust. And so we'll work on this one. And so my first adjustment is going to be a basic adjustment, which is pretty standard. And so for the basic, I am going to bring the exposure up. I think we can bring the exposure up a bit here. That's looking a little washed out, but I haven't set my black point or my white point. Now we have a pretty easy to read histogram up here, so I'm just going to take my black level to the edge there. Just watch the histogram when I do this. And over to the right, take my white level right to there. And now I've got a really great starting point. Now, I don't know how well you guys can see this, but there's sort of a green cast to some of this lava, and some of that was probably there just because this is near sunset and I've got directional like warm light on this black lava, but it's a little too green for my taste and a little too green from the way it looked. So I'm gonna use the white balance or attempt to. I can always set these manually if it doesn't work. It's a tricky one. This is a tricky one. So I'm gonna go up here and enlarge this to 100%. Maybe I'll go even a little bit bigger. I keep hitting my menu there. All right, so I'm gonna look for something that should be sort of neutral. I don't know, maybe this black thing here, we'll see what happens. The problem is that this stuff is in all different light. Well, that's not bad. I think it went a little too blue. Let's look at it overall. So it didn't take out enough of the green, and I think it went a little too blue because I'm losing that nice warm sunshine. You don't really want to do neutralize the sunset. You don't want to have a complete neutral white. That's what white balance does, is it neutralizes it. So I'm going to bring the yellow value back up quite a bit because I want that warmness, and I might add a little more magenta to help counteract the green because magenta is the opposite of green. So I think that's pretty good right there. Now I'm going to use an adjustment a lot of people don't think about. It comes with Studio for free. It's called dual tone, and a lot of people think of this more as like for special effects or just doing kind of funky toning, color toning to an image. But I like it for landscapes and sunsets, especially stuff with water. In this case, where it's lava, but it's the way to bring out the highlights and shadows separately with separate colors. So I'll show you what I mean right here. As soon as I move this highlight color slider, it brings up a hue adjustment. So I set the, excuse me, I set the color that I want. It defaults to yellow in the highlight and it defaults to blue in the shadow. So I do want yellow in the highlight, so I'll probably leave it there. I might go a little more towards the orange, but let me bring this up. I'm going to bring this up quite a bit. So now you can see I'm starting to get, it's just affecting the highlights and I'm getting those nice warm tones back. It's a little greenish, so I'm going to move it away from the green and make it a little more towards that orangey yellow warmer side. And then the shadows, because I still kind of have that greenish cast, I'm going to move my hue slider sort of over to the reds in this 80-ish range. And then I'll bring this up just a little bit. And you can see it's now, as I move up around that 15-ish range, that's pretty nice. It's kind of taken a lot of that green cast out of there. So now I have that nice warm light. And my only real problem area, so to speak, is just the sky. I realize now that I forgot to crop this image, but that's okay. So what I can do is just mask out this effect from the sky, because what's happening is that's a highlight and it added a lot of yellow in there. It's kind of washing out my blue. So I'm just going to take a brush and make it a pretty broad one and just brush in the blue areas here so that I get, see, now I've got my blue sky back and I still have that nice contrast with that yellow warm sunlight against the blue in the sky. So dual tone is kind of an overlooked one, but it's a really handy one. I'm going to throw another HSL tuning in here, and this is because I want to isolate the blue. I'm just going to try to change the color of the blue to make it look a little more like it did. It was a little more aqua, so it's not a not a big change. If I want, I can darken the blue a little bit. That's a little more like it might have been. Again, we're going for the natural look here. And then I'm going to throw some precision, precision contrast to give it our sense of depth. I'll use similar settings to what I did before. In fact, I have some presets here, so let me just try a preset. So there's add depth, landscape, canyon. I've got a couple different options that these are all the ones below the gray line I did myself. All you do is just save off your settings as a preset. And that's pretty close to the way I want it. All I might do is just bring the micro contrast up a little bit. And I'm going to bring this down just a hair, but I still want the minus highlight on there. I'm just kind of looking at my histogram here to run it to the edges again. So let's look at, there's before without that sense of depth, without the precision contrast, and there it is with. And here, I'll do the color tuning one too so you can see. Whoops, yeah, so this is before the color tuning, that's after the color tuning. And so that's pretty nice effect. Let's see how we're doing on time. I am going to try to maybe squeeze one more in here. The other thing I might just mention here is it's a little dark in here, so you could always throw on a basic adjustment, bring up the exposure. And I'm just looking at this back section here, and then I'm gonna go into the masking. I'm gonna hit the reverse so I block everything out. Remember, black conceals. I'm just gonna take kind of a broad brush here. Let's make it, whoop, there's my brush. Let's make it even bigger. And I'm just gonna go through this part. Oops, I wanna make it white, not black. It's already black. And so I'm just lightening up that area a little bit so that we can, because it was getting a little, some of the shadow detail was getting a little blocked. So there's, you know, the masking in this thing is wonderful, and it's super easy to do, and it's great for tweaking things really quickly. All right, next image. Let's see. We'll go over here. So this is the net. This is the one I'm going to try to squeeze. So this is a 17th century windmill in Sicily, and it was originally used in the process of harvesting sea salt. I shot this right around sunset, so we have nice warm light and actually kind of this eerie grayish blue sky, which is pretty much what it looked like. Again, we're kind of going for natural look here. And although this has some great colors, I think it also makes a really nice black and white, and hopefully I'm gonna have time to show you both. So this is the black and white that I created from it too, which I really like. I'd be hard pressed to choose one over the other. They really have different feels to them, but they're both nice. So believe it or not, this is where I started from. This is the raw file. And as we say, raw is blah. And so the first thing I'm going to do is go down to the lower left here with the cropping tool. I was shooting with the longest lens I had, but it wasn't quite long enough from the vantage point I had. So I'm just going to crop in a little bit, kind of get rid of the extraneous information here. Whoops. And sorry, let me reset this. All right, I don't know what happened there. Let me go back into the crop tool. All right, so I'm going to bring it down here. I'm going to bring it up from the bottom, and I'm going to come in on the sides to kind of fake a longer telephoto lens here. All right, that looks pretty good. We've got our tower on the thirds, our people sitting down there on the thirds. There's I'm not actually a big fan of the rule of thirds, but those of you that are, we're following some of them there. So there's my crop. And again, the first thing I'll do is put on AI Clear. And you notice as soon as you invoke it, it brings it to 100%. As soon as that blue bar is done, watch the detail pop in there. Pretty cool. So that goes a long ways towards just doing that capture sharpening. There's quite a bit of detail in here. Um, I want to mention something in case some of you are on Macintosh, like I have. Some Macintoshes, if you run AI Clear, basically AI Clear recalculates every time you make a change. And so if that gets annoying, what you can do is, if you're usually AI Clear is your first step, what you can do is just hit apply, and it'll apply AI Clear and give you a new starting point. So now you notice it doesn't show any more adjustments here, and then I can kind of start from that as a baseline. And that's, not an issue on a lot of computers, but if you're having that issue, that's something you can do. So let's do precision detail really quick. Actually, you know what I think I'm going to do here? Let me show you, since I want to try to leave time for questions too. I am going to find here. I'll use this one, and let's do a dissection. I'm going to go backwards. So this is the final. I'm going to turn off all of these layers. Now I already showed you the AI clear adjustment, and so the first thing that I did on this one, I kind of did these in maybe a slightly different sequence. I think I did precision detail second instead of first. It doesn't matter that much on this. So what I did for the basic adjustment is pretty much what you'd expect and what you saw me do on the other ones. I adjusted my exposure. I brought the black level down, the white level up. This histogram is most of the information's in the middle, so it's a little hard to tell. But you can eyeball it if you have a calibrated monitor. You can adjust by eye, or you can use your histogram, or you can use these eyedroppers. Then the next thing and that's all I did on the basic adjustment. The next thing I did was precision detail, and let me enlarge that so you can see what happened here. And that's just getting back that detail that the camera was not able to translate all the way, or that gets lost from the translation of the capture on. If I turn that off, it's kind of subtle, but you can see, look at the detail in the tower, and that's really kind of the stonework, because this thing is really old, and the tower and everything, that's kind of my main interest there. And when I turn it back on, now you should be able to see that detail again. The next one I used, and this is that HSL color tuning, and again, that's one that I use on a lot of images. So what I did here, if you look at this, you can see these little blue underlines are the ones that I adjusted. So I did an overall, which you can see is very subtle. It's only 5% on the overall saturation. On the red saturation, I did quite a bit. I'll bring that back down to 0. And basically what I was trying to do is just bring up, this was a very vivid red in the getting hit by that warm sunlight. And so to translate that, let's see the way it was, I brought it up to 32. And that makes it a nice vivid red the way it looked. The oranges, if I bring that up a lot, you can see there's a lot of orange values in there. I didn't bring it up a ton. Again, I want it to be warm just like it did from the sunset. I don't want it to be unnatural. And same thing with the yellow. If I bring those yellows up a lot, you can see there's a lot of yellow in there. Again, I'm doing a fairly subtle adjustment just to kind of get the warmness. But it's a pretty big difference if I turn off the HSL tuning, what that really does to bring it back. In fact, this looks a lot like a little less saturated than the Velvia film simulation in my Fuji camera. Then I'm going to kind of ignore this HSL, because all that was to try to adjust this person's red jacket to bring it down a little bit, but it's hardly noticeable, so I'll just delete that. Again, the precision contrast, this is for to bring back a sense of 3 dimensions for depth. So and these settings are pretty much what I've been using all along. Seems to be like that 30-30-30 seems to be kind of a magic combination for a lot of images to get depth. And then in this case, the only thing I did different, instead of taking the high contrast down, I didn't want to affect, the shadows looked good, so I didn't want to bring those in because they were fine, and I wanted them there for the contrast. But you can adjust all those things down here under lighting separately. So all I did was bring down the highlights only. So if I let those go up, it's pretty subtle, but if I increase this, you can see what it's doing. And so I just brought those down to about a -50. So let me do a before and after with this too, so you can see. Right, there's before, and there's after. Pretty big difference on that. And then the last one I did was that our friend, the dual tone, like I did on the lava picture, and it's pretty subtle, but it's just to bring up the blue in the sky, and the water, which are kind of shadows. And I use this a lot on water shots with like this. This isn't really a landscape per se, but there is water in it and warm light. So a lot of times you're shooting a water scene at sunset, and this dual tone is great for that. So you'll notice I have a mask in there, and that so that I'm just affecting the water. And the mask was easier to create than you might think. I'll reset it. And what I did here is I used the color. So I do the color and I pick black, and then what I do is put the dropper on the blue, and so it makes everything that's blue black. Now I really want the opposite of that because I want to be affecting the sky. Remember, white reveals and black conceals. Well, we don't really have black there, it's kind of gray. So what I do is hit this adjust button and just tweak this a little bit. So one thing I can do is just bring the density down so the whole thing is darker. So now we have a blacked out, what we want blacked out, and then I increase the contrast to get my white areas back. And voila, there we are. The only other thing you might want to do is just brush back in some of this down here, and you can see it appearing in the mask window so that we're affecting the water. So that's really all I did in that one, and the masking tools in this are just amazing. And so there you are. Now I have, looks like a few minutes. I'm going to try to show you the black and white effects really fast. So we'll use this as our starting point. I'm going to go back into plugins. This is such an awesome tool for black and white. Now it's different than the black and white adjustment. The black and white adjustment is that pretty standard thing you see in a lot of processors where you can adjust the tonal range of each color. All right, well, that was where I left it off, which was my finishing thing. But I'll reset it so you can see how I get there. So again, we have that familiar interface with our collections and presets on the left and our tools on the right. Now something I'll show you in here, the conversion on this has adaptive exposure. So Black and White Effects has that same technology, that wonderful exposure balancing technology that you saw earlier in Adjust when I showed you. And what I'm going to do is I'll click, I just want to show you this. If on these collections, I'm on the traditional collection that's highlighted blue. If I click on the grid, it just gives me a little sample of all the different ways I can look at this. And so I scroll down, there's ones with borders, warm tones, cool tones, etc. My go-to almost every time for starting point is classic. So if I click on that, wham, it's almost there. And it's a great starting point. And so if I look at the conversion, you can see it's using basic exposure and adaptive exposure. I'm just going to tweak those a little bit. So I'm going to raise my adaptive exposure up a little more, and I definitely want to increase the regions. So my rule of thumb is the higher number you have on adaptive exposure, the higher number of regions you want. And you saw it really even out the sky because there really are differing pockets all over the place, differing pockets of exposure, areas with totally different exposure. So, and if you want to see the difference, you can just click this box here. There's before adaptive exposure, there's with adaptive exposure. Now, the only issue I have here is that the gray of this tower, which we know to be bright red, and if you want to see, you can set this up to show you the before image as color or the before image as black and white. I have it set as the before image for color. So I have a bright red thing there, but the gray part is I want to keep that differentiated from the sky. So I have two problems here. I want to darken the sky. Well, let's see what happens when I do that. And one way to darken the sky is just like with old-fashioned filters, and that's what these colored dots are up here. I'm going to click on the yellow filter. Well, that is way overkill. So I do want yellow, but I'm just going to bring the strength way down here, like maybe there. So now the sky is the way I want it, and there's my dilemma, is that the tower part didn't change that much, so it's kind of blending in. So what I can do is I can go to color sensitivity and take, these are those channels that I can adjust the tonality. So I know it's a red value, and I just darken it a little bit, and voila, there I have my tower differentiated. The other thing I'm just going to touch on super quick, and then we'll open it up to questions, is this Z up here is for the zone system. Those of you that are not familiar with it, it basically divides all the exposure for black and white from on a 0 to 10 scale. It was popularized by Ansel Adams back in the day, and each number represents a full f-stop change in exposure, so doubling or halving the amount of light, and it relates to the tonal range in your image. So 0 is no detail, nothing there, no tone. 10 is pure white, no tone. And so what you can do is you can check areas of the image, and if I click on those, you can see it's color coding them. Here, let me bring it up to 1 to 1. Here, I'll click on I'm clicking on zone 10, so that's pure white. There's no detail in there. So what you can do is you can use this as a guidelines, and I can go into adaptive exposure, for instance, and protect my highlight. So as I move that up, once I have to get up pretty high before I get rid of that. I don't necessarily want to get rid of that because it is a bright highlight, but you get the idea. This is a nice tool. Oh, I lost my color filter there, or at least the strength part. Let me bring that back down to a more reasonable level. So anyway, we can, if I want to say, tweak something and see where it is in my picture, I can just click on it. So I click on 5, those are all the zone 5, or I can just use my cursor to do it. So now now that tells me, if I look over here, that that area is zone 3, and now it's telling me that area is zone 4, etc. So that tool is really nice to just see where things are going to come out in a print, or just where they are exposure-wise. And I'll turn that off. And there's a myriad of tools in here that I don't have time to show you all of them, but since I had an edge exposure on that, or sorry, a border on that one. One of my favorite borders are the grunge borders, because they kind of look like a film edge, and like or torn paper edge or whatever. So then we can, and in fact, it has really great toning too. So if I turn on the toning, it defaults to sepia tone, but you can put whatever highlight and shadow tone you want. There's even quad tones. I'll just leave it there, and you can adjust the strength. So I'll bring it up a little bit, make it a little more sepia, and we'll say okay. So there we are, and let's do our before. I don't know why it's doing the same one for the before. Oh yeah, that's because it's here. Let's look at our before. So this is where we started the raw file. This is where we ended up with the black and white. And this is where we ended up with the color. And I think I can do the before and after. Yeah, there we go. Between the raw on the left and the color adjustments on the right. All right, I think we're almost at the end here. I will stay after to answer questions after the hour, but I'll turn it back over to you, Heath, and maybe we can answer a few questions.
If you guys want to follow Joel, I know he mentioned and showed you a little bit. He's got workshops. He's got a wonderful newsletter. You can visit his website, joelwolfson.com. You can also visit his blog, joelwolfson.com/blog. Or if you have any questions we weren't able to get to, you can email him at info@joelwolfson.com. As always, if you have any questions for us, you can always contact us directly at webinars@topazlabs.com. and you can sign up for upcoming webinars. I've got some more I got to throw in the schedule at topazlabs.com/webinars. Really glad you guys were able to join us today. I'm excited because we did go over 1,000 attendees. I think we've maxed out at 1,035. Used to we could
Awesome.
only get 1,000, so now our limit is 2,000. I'm really excited to hit that limit again. So tell your friends, and everybody, thank you for joining us. Joel, thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, thanks so much. I appreciate it. Thank you all for joining us. I've got 2 spots left on my Provence workshop. Anybody wants to go to France in 2 weeks? Otherwise, I will see you at the next webinar, and we'll have a lot of fun on that one. I've got some good ideas for it, and I'll be showing totally different adjustments for that, and it'll be a lot of fun. And I think my next one is October, early October, I believe, after I get back from my France workshop. So thank you all. Have a great day, evening, whatever it is in the time zone you're in, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Good night.